y'all, I'm Cece, and today I am here to talk about my 31 spooky movies in 31 days challenge. Okay, so I spent most of October watching movies that are perfect for Halloween, including a couple of big releases that I'm particularly excited to talk about. Before we get to the list, you may have noticed something different about me. Yes, it's the glasses. Thank you for noticing. We'll talk more about those later. Hi, it's later. Today's sponsor is GlassesUSA.com. Thank you so much to GlassesUSA.com for sponsoring today's video and for sending me 3 pairs of glasses that you will be seeing in a minute. Here's pair number 1. I've been wearing glasses since I was 16 years old, and I've gone through a lot of different frames and styles since then, which is why it's so nice to be able to shop for glasses online at GlassesUSA.com, where I can take all the time I need to find the right frames at the right price. By cutting out the middleman, GlassesUSA.com offers over 10,000 prescription glasses and sunglasses, including in-house brands like Muse and Amelia E, and designer brands like Ray-Ban, Oakley, Gucci, and many more at up to 70% off of retail prices. There are so many different brands and styles available on GlassesUSA.com that they actually offer a quiz that you can take. It helps narrow down your options so that you can find the best pair for your needs and for your beautiful face. And for even more help, there is a virtual try-on tool where you can actually see what the glasses are going to look like on your face, which is seriously so much nicer than squinting into that mirror like right after my eyes have been dilated and I can't see anything. Plus, shopping online at GlassesUSA.com is a risk-free shopping experience. Shipping and returns are free, and if you have any issues with your glasses, there is a 100% money-back guarantee within 14 days. GlassesUSA.com is also the perfect place if you're looking to stock up on contact lenses. I tend to switch to contact lenses when I'm cosplaying because it's just a little easier than wandering around seeing at 240p while pretending to be Arya Stark. And at GlassesUSA.com you can get 25% off of all contact lens brands. So this lovely pair of glasses that I am wearing right now, I was particularly excited to find. I knew when I was looking for glasses this time that I wanted something that felt more like wireframes. I was so glad that I ended up finding these. I love the shape, I love how they feel, and I love the geometric pattern at the top. They're perfect. I've been wearing them since they arrived. I got this second pair of frames because I love having the option to switch to a pair that doesn't have the little, like, nose rest things. I used to have a hard and fast rule with my glasses that they would always have to be a fun color, so I feel like these hold true to that. And finally, because I am light sensitive and I need prescription sunglasses in my life, I wound up choosing these frames. They make me feel like I should be on the beach in the 70s. Thank goodness I get to be light sensitive and look cool at the same time. If you want to check out any of these frames or explore the thousands of options on GlassesUSA.com, you can use the top link in my description to go and check them out. Thank you so much again to GlassesUSA.com for sponsoring this video, and now let's talk about movies.
Hey honey, guess what you get? No collar. Isn't that cool?
Okay. So, in October, I made it my goal that me and my roommate Brian were going to attempt to watch 31 Halloween perfect films in 31 days. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. However, I tried, and I still have 24 movies that I really want to be able to talk more about. So some of these films of these 24 I have seen before, but I was rewatching them for very specific reasons in October, and I will get to those reasons. Not every single one is a horror movie. Some of them are thrillers. There are a couple of more campy movies or horror comedies, and these movies range in release date from 1979 to 2022, and I am talking 2 movies released in October of 2022, so pretty wide range of years. When I made the plan, I set up an entire Notion board dedicated to figuring out the main films that I wanted to work on watching and some of the goals that me and Brian had in terms of franchises that we wanted to finish or just movies that we've been meaning to get to. The Notion board was super helpful because it split things up into different categories so we could choose what kind of movies we were in the mood for on a particular day, and every single one that was on the list was available to stream somewhere on one of our streaming services. So that was a huge part of the research process, is making sure that we could actually access any of the movies on our list at a given time. during October. So the main two goals going into the month for us were to finish up the Alien and Predator franchise in a distinctly weird way. Basically, Brian and I were each missing one movie that we hadn't seen from either the Alien or Predator franchise, and the other goal I had was really wanting to watch The Evil Dead and The Evil Dead 2. Because oddly enough, I've seen Army of Darkness several times, which is technically a sequel to The Evil Dead 2, but I've never seen either of the original movies. So with those and some of the newer horror movies that Brian and I wanted to prioritize, we had our list. I think at this point I want to jump into talking about these 24 movies, so go ahead, grab a drink, settle in, and let's start by talking about the earliest release on the list, Alien. So let me catch you up on Alien and Predator, because there is a story. A couple of years ago, Brian and I decided we wanted to make it a goal to watch every movie in the Alien franchise and every movie in the Predator franchise, plus any crossovers between the two. And we did watch most of those movies during that year, but while we were watching those movies, we skipped one. Each of us. Brian has seen the later releases in the Alien franchise multiple times, but he had never seen the original Alien in full. And while I had watched everything, we skipped over Predator 2 because I just couldn't do another sweaty dude movie. But it's been rectified. We have now seen every single movie in both the Alien and Predator franchises. So I revisited Alien, which is one of my long-standing favorites. This was released in 1979, and God, does it stand the test of time! I remember watching this in college and realizing that there were movies like this. It's just unreal how well the tension builds. Every actor is bringing their A game. I love the sets and feel of the first Alien, and I am one of the rare people who prefers Alien the original to Aliens. I think Aliens is good. I don't think it's as good as Alien. We also rewatched the original Predator because I didn't love it the first time, but I felt like I understood the franchise a lot better once I'd seen everything else, so I wanted to loop back around to the beginning. Also, I had watched a lot more Arnold Schwarzenegger movies at this point, and I will say that I appreciated the original Predator, which was released in 1987. I enjoyed that one a lot more the second time, but the real meat is Predator 2, the one I skipped, the one I'd never seen before, and you know what? Turns out there was a reason. It was one of the weaker ones. Not the weakest. I can tell you that Shane Black's The Predator, I feel I should have been paid for having to sit through it. The main thing that I couldn't stop thinking about while watching Predator 2 was the fact that the setting reminded me so much of the Bell Riots in Star Trek. I don't know if you're familiar with this concept, but like, sweaty LA rebellion, very much the vibe. I think the issue with Predator 2 is that it is trying very hard to recreate some of the magic of Predator 1. It's trying really hard to get those, like, famous Arnold one-liners in there, but they didn't get Arnold, so. And so, finally in this, we have to talk about Prey. This was the reason for all of the rewatching. I watched Prey when it was brand new, and it came out at the beginning of this year, and I absolutely loved it. I was obsessed with it. I thought it was so fascinating, and I've been thinking about it for months. So Brian and I wanted to make sure that we had finished off all of the other movies so we could go back to Prey, having really seen everything. Prey was released earlier this year, 2022, on Hulu. It's tragic it didn't get a theatrical release because it is a fantastic movie directed by Dan Trachtenberg. I bring up Dan Trachtenberg because I had another of his movies on my list to watch in October, but I didn't end up getting to it, that being 10 Cloverfield Lane. I've heard that that's incredible, so I was hoping to double up on Dan Trachtenberg films, but it didn't happen. But Dan Trachtenberg's history goes further than that. He is also known for directing the premiere episode of The Boys, and he directed one of my favorite episodes of Black Mirror, an episode called Playtest, starring Wyatt Russell, which is terrifying. The main thing I want to say about Prey is that I think this can be watched super independently of any of the other movies. If that's the thing that's been holding you back, I would encourage you to just check it out. There are definitely things that you know about the Predator going in if you've watched the other movies, but ultimately, most Predator stories are about people discovering certain aspects of the Predator. But this also has the distinction of being the earliest chronologically in the Predator series. It came out most recently, but setting-wise, it takes place significantly before the other movies. So that is another good thing to know, that you can kind of go in seeing it as a prequel. But the other thing is that this is just a really good movie about a Comanche woman learning to fight. It's about her learning to fight, but it's also about her knowing her own capacity to fight and her own capacity to survive and her own capacity to protect the people that she cares about. I'm gonna be watching this and rewatching this for years. It's an incredible movie. It is one of the best of the entire franchise on either end. I think it's interesting that my personal favorites remain the very earliest with Alien and the very newest with Prey, but it's just how it happened. Since we're already talking about a couple of movies that I have seen before, I'm going to take this opportunity to run through the Halloweentown films very quickly. Okay, now I know, either you have already seen Halloweentown or you have no interest in seeing Halloweentown. That's fine, but I do have a couple of very fun facts about the series that I think you could be interested in if you stick around for this little segment. So, the Halloweentown movies, we have a spread of years. The original Halloweentown was released in 1998. It was followed by Halloweentown 2, Calabar's Revenge in 2001. Then we got Halloweentown High in 2004, and finally the extremely controversial Return to Halloweentown in 2006. Return to Halloweentown is controversial if you don't know, because the main character was recast without any announcement or explanation to either us or the original actress, the true Marnie, Kimberly J. Brown, which is a travesty. I have seen these movies more times than I care to admit, so we'll move into the facts portion. I think it's interesting that these movies were each filmed in different places. The first Halloweentown was filmed in Oregon, the second Halloweentown was filmed in Canada, and both Halloweentown High and Return to Halloweentown were filmed in my home state, Utah. And an additional fun fact, a lot of Disney Channel original movies are filmed in Utah. Like, a lot. So some local trivia. Return to Halloweentown is set at a magical school, and there is a scene in which our main character, Marnie, goes on a date on a broom ride with a boy that she likes, Ethan. And after the broom ride, they land and they grab some food. Now, the street they land on is an incredibly recognizable street if you grew up in northern Utah, especially in the Ogden area. It is called 25th Street, and if you did grow up in the area, as I did, it is somewhat of a local tradition as a beautiful spot to go on your nice little high school teenage date. Now, I never got the chance to do the cute 25th Street date for a variety of reasons, so years later, when I was able to bring my girlfriend home for a visit, I got to do the famous 25th Street date, but gay. And I just think it's really iconic that Marnie also did the iconic Utah 25th Street date. Fun fact number 2, my dad is an actor in Return to Halloweentown. He is in a scene with the incredible Judith Hoag, which at the time I considered his greatest achievement, despite the fact that I stand with Kimberly J. Brown as our one and only Marnie. My dad is an actor who's mostly famous for being in an iconically terrible horror movie. When I was a kid, he would regularly get acting jobs, and this included some Disney Channel original movies. My dad is also in Good Luck Charlie, It's Christmas. So, alright, there are your facts. Do the Halloweentown movies stand up to the test of time? No, absolutely not. Am I, convinced every time I watch Halloweentown High that it's a cinematic masterpiece? Yes. Because it is. So we're already talking about movies set in high school. Let's talk about 2 rip-roaring teen thrillers from 2 very different points in time. Do Revenge, which was released this year, 2022, and Disturbing Behavior, which was released in 1998. I didn't think of putting these 2 movies together to talk about until I was scripting this video, and the second I did, it seemed genius in retrospect. Do Revenge is a modern dark comedy about 2 girls, a agreeing to do each other's revenge against the bullies who have made their lives hell. We're talking crisscross, strangers on a train, you do mine, I do yours, etc. Disturbing Behavior is a thriller about a new kid in town who discovers something sinister is happening that is turning kids from normal rebellious teens into upstanding citizens overnight. Alright, these both have issues, but I'm gonna be upfront and say that if you want to watch a movie that has teen drama and like high stakes, just watch Disturbing Behavior. Skip Do Revenge. Skip it. Do Revenge was a travesty, a disaster it was hoping that you wouldn't notice because you would be too distracted by all their attempts at Gen Z lingo. I just said Gen Z lingo. That starts to feel like then I'm the old one. Ah. Look, if I'm gonna watch a movie about revenge, I have some expectations. For that matter, if I'm going to watch a movie that's going for an updated Heathers vibe, I definitely have some expectations. This movie isn't Strangers on a Train, it is one train wreck after another until you realize, oh no, the movie is going to be like this the whole time. I think something that's so key to teen dramas like this is that idea of like teen rage, and all of the teen rage in this felt hollow. Like, Heathers, you get it. The most essential thing that I learned about Disturbing Behavior, on the other hand, is that the director of this film also directed the first 2 episodes of Supernatural. That may not seem like a very big fact to you, but my brain was lowered into a radioactive vat of Supernatural knowledge when I was 17, and unfortunately it became a permanent aspect of my personality. But besides that, I found out later in a video by Good Bad Flicks that this movie was put through the ringer in terms of studio expectations and edits, and it was really destroyed, and the director was given no chance to release the movie he wanted to make, which actually makes the movie make a lot more sense. There are some really weird character jumps in the final act that don't quite connect, and it's because we're missing scenes that the director filmed for a reason, plus the original ending was changed, and I think you can tell. But on the plus side, Disturbing Behavior felt like watching an episode of Buffy. Like, inspirations of Wes Craven were there. It has a really great concept, it has a Stepford Wives-esque storyline, and James Marsden, Nick Stahl, and Katie Holmes are all really good. It's a good movie about dread and about expectations and even about grief, and it's a genuine shame that the studio did to it what it did, because even with those cuts, it stands out as a really strong movie about high school and rage and conformity. And I have to say, if you want to do a movie about those things, then maybe you should do Disturbing Behavior and not Do Revenge. One other high school film we have is The Babysitter Killer Queen, which was released in 2022, and it is the sequel to The Babysitter, which is a pretty good movie. If you enjoy an over-the-top horror comedy that's just gonna be a little loud but fun, then I definitely recommend the original Babysitter, but this movie is trying so hard to create the magic, and it is failing a lot. Jenna Ortega, Samara Weaving, I love you. But this wasn't good. So definitely check out The Babysitter, but I think you can steer clear of the sequel unless you want Take Two, but worse. A sequel I think you should not steer clear of is A Quiet Place Part 2, also released in 2020. This is just a super worthy follow-up to A Quiet Place. I think A Quiet Place is a brilliant film. I will forever remember the first time I watched that in a completely silent, packed theater on opening weekend. And I think it's reflective of the time that we're in that A Quiet Place 2 has such a different viewing experience, because I think that you feel that lack of connection with the characters. Like, they're trapped away from people too, and there's a certain kind of loneliness that rings differently now. This had a super hard act to follow, and I think it followed it up incredibly well. It had new, excellent characters, it built interesting things out of established characters, and Millicent Simmons is a delight. These movies deserve their spot on my list of favorites. And this movie also features Cillian Murphy, segues are easy. So after watching A Quiet Place 2, my brain went into a mode of, let's consume once more everything that Cillian Murphy has ever been in. The whole Cillian Murphy horror thriller collection was suddenly up in my head, and I had to watch them as soon as possible. Like, we were seconds away from me binging Sunshine, 28 Days Later, and Red Eye, one after another, but tragically, the first two didn't happen. But that is okay, because I still got to watch Red Eye. Now, I mentioned Wes Craven earlier. This movie is directed by Wes Craven, and it was released in 2005, and it has powerhouse acting team, I want to say. Besides just Cillian Murphy, the other two leads are Rachel McAdams, and then as a supporting character, Brian Cox. Collectively, those are three of my favorite people working in producing cinema of any kind. I love that this is an early aughts thriller that feels a little campy, but just works because it has the actors to hold the story together. The plot of this movie is a woman gets on a plane, and on this standard flight, she is kidnapped and taken hostage by the person sitting next to her. If you haven't seen this movie, I definitely recommend it. I don't see it get mentioned as much in terms of other movies like this from this period in time, and I think it deserves the praise. Let's run through my other rewatches really fast. Just burn through these. How much could I really say about a movie I've seen 800 times? I'm just kidding. I could talk about movies I've seen 100 times for hours. So I also rewatched Hocus Pocus, which was released in 1993, with the intention of watching Hocus Pocus 2, and then I never watched Hocus Pocus 2. That's it. I don't have another explanation. I rewatched Monster House from 2006, and talk about a movie that doesn't stand up. I used to rewatch this movie all the time, and this time the storyline and plot made me viscerally uncomfortable to the point that I never want to watch this movie again, and I'm actively questioning what we were all doing in 2006. You know? Somehow, fat woman dumb and scary, except when her jailbreaker manages to walk the very thin line between husband and owner, isn't the concept that gets ya. I also rewatched The Conjuring, originally released in 2013, with the intention of finishing off this trilogy, which I didn't do. I have seen both this and the second Conjuring movie, and the completionist in me just wants to see the third movie. I don't even need to see all of the other movies in the wide range of connected stories. Just these Conjuring films. I will say that I think The Conjuring is a genuinely good horror movie. Patrick Wilson does a great job, and all of the child actors are very good. The final rewatch I want to talk about is actually an interesting one, and that is the original Poltergeist, originally released in 1982. And this movie holds special distinction as being my personal horror movie that I watched way too young that traumatized me for the rest of my life. I picked up this movie from a Blockbuster video to watch during a sleepover with my cousin, and I gained a fear of trees so specific and intense that it's still with me to this day. Yes, fear of trees is a specific fear. This is a specific movie. So I didn't watch this movie again for 10 years after that, and the next time I watched it was on an airplane. Truly not the viewing experience that I remember at all. Which makes this, I want to say, the first time I've consumed this movie for real as an adult, and I have to say, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good movie. The use of tracking shots and practical effects worked to scare me when I was a kid. They're super effective now. There was one distinctive scene I had stuck in my brain for years besides the tree scene. It's a scene that has to do with chairs moving, and it's a particular long shot when it happens, and it's brilliant. It's one of my favorite, shots in a horror movie of all time. Brian had never seen this movie in full, so he actually at one point just abandoned the game that he'd been playing to come and sit with me on the couch so that we could watch it and he could experience it for the first time, and he too came away with a review that it was actually really good. I miss movies that star people who look like you could run into them while you were shopping for milk. You know? You're not gonna believe this. Fear of Trees is actually relevant to the next movie on my list. So let's talk about The Night House, which was released in 2019 and directed by David Bruckner. David Bruckner directed one of my favorite horror movies of all time, The Ritual. Let's take a look at that cover for a second. I love The Ritual, but if you have a fear of getting lost, if you have a fear of things being just out of sight in a tree line, don't watch this movie. It will traumatize you. David Bruckner, your visuals make my brain yell. The Night House has the nerve to have ominous tree lines constantly, which I think is particularly rude. Like, I already lived through The Ritual. But The Night House wound up being one of my favorite movies that I watched in October. It was in my top 3 in terms of gorgeous visuals and effective storylines. There's so much of this that I liked. I don't think the ending was as strong as it could have been. It feels like this movie builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and then you need that one more build, and it doesn't do it. So it's not that the ending is bad, it's just that it kind of feels like you're waiting still. However, Rebecca Hall, I am obsessed with you. I love you. Everyone should go and watch Professor Marston and the Wonder Women. That's not a horror movie, that's just a really good movie that I think you should watch that Rebecca Hall is in. Since we're already talking about David Bruckner, that gives me the opportunity to talk about his newest movie, Hellraiser, which was released at the beginning of October. So this is yet another 2022 release, and this is actually another Hulu original, because they've kind of been killing it over on Hulu. Hellraiser had a lot going for it in terms of names. I was very excited to hear that Jamie Clayton would be playing the new Pinhead, because I love Jamie Clayton in Sense8. She did an incredible job as Pinhead. Also, Goran Visnich is in this movie. He is an actor that I've actually been seeing a lot of this year. I watched most of ER earlier this year, and Goran plays Dr. Luca, one of the pretty boy doctors of that show, which I grew up watching. So I also just recently watched his episode of Doctor Who, and it was easily my favorite of the 13th Doctor's episodes. It just was fabulous. So I was excited to see him in this. Like I said, this is also a David Bruckner movie. I wanted to watch multiple of his movies in October, if at all possible, because I'd had 2 of them so high up on my to-watch list. The only other thing that I'd known David Bruckner for prior to this was that he directed my favorite short in the original VHS. It was a short called Amateur Night. So, a big part of the problem with this is probably the fact that I'm not the biggest fan of the original Hellraiser. I have nothing against that Hellraiser, I just didn't vibe with it. It's not my, personal style of movie. My complaint with this Hellraiser is actually that it was just too clean. It was like the Apple Store version of Hellraiser. All of the Cenobites are too pristine, the kills are super repetitive, and it just doesn't have, kind of the grime that you need when you're making a Hellraiser movie. I liked that this movie, I think, did a very good job of setting up the mythology of Hellraiser. I like that you can just jump in here, and this is an okay Hellraiser to watch, even if you haven't seen any of the others. But mostly, it just ends up being forgettable. Okay, we're winding down. Let me take a second to talk about the worst movie that I watched in October before we wrap it up with the rest of the movies that I really did like. So, Old, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. This is a movie about a beach that makes you old. Old was released in 2021, and I want to say it has all of the trappings of an interesting horror movie, but as has become kind of standard for M. Night Shyamalan, the writing and the ending really drove this into the ground. Okay, a group of people are stuck on a beach that makes them age rapidly. That is an interesting concept if you play it out the right way. And I will say that the best aspects of this movie are when they are leaning into that concept. The body horror aspects of this movie are pretty good, and I think that the kills work because you're so over the beach that makes you old that you're just like, fine. The beach makes you old. Show me weird stuff. You start this movie with kids running around asking every single person they meet, "Hi, what is your name and your profession?" So that's rough. That's weird. And every actor individually thinks that they are in a different genre of film, so again, odd vibe, but it truly is the ending where this just crumbles. I spent the last 30 minutes of this movie begging aloud that it would end. To just do me the kindness to stop happening. Genuinely tragic. Genuinely. Let's move on from a movie that was attempting to be good and wound up terrible to talking about a movie that was attempting to be horror and ended up being a cult classic comedy. I did manage to watch both The Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 in October for the very first time on both counts. The Evil Dead was released in 1981 and Evil Dead 2 was released in 1987, and there is a sequel to Evil Dead 2 called Army of Darkness, which I, like I said, have seen multiple times, so it was cool to have some, context. So I absolutely loved both of these movies. I knew I would. To a certain extent, I knew I would, but I'm so glad that I did. Cabin in the Woods has been a favorite movie of mine and my sister's since we watched it for the first time, and I want to say like a third of the references in that movie come from The Evil Dead, so it was nice to have a little additional context. The Evil Dead is about 5 friends who go on a vacation up to a cabin in the woods and accidentally and unknowingly release a flesh-possessing demon. Well, not one. Multiple flesh-possessing demons. It's not just the one. There's, you know, here's the thing. The original film was intended to be just, like, straight horror. And then the movie came out, and test audiences watched it, and they just kept being like, what a great comedy you've made. But Sam Raimi, director, writer, icon extraordinaire, said, oh, you think that was a comedy? I'll show you a horror comedy. And he remade his own movie intentionally as a horror comedy. So both of these movies feature Bruce Campbell. He is not quite the star of the first one, but he is decidedly the star of the second one. I think both of these are excellent. The over-the-top stuff works so well in the first one, and then the degree to which it is pushed in the second one is even more special. Really knowing that the director was like, I'll show you comedy. Might I just say, this is an interesting pair of films to talk about when I've just spent the previous however many minutes detailing for you my history of horror movie tree-related trauma. If you don't know what that sentence means, you probably don't want to. I grew up watching Bruce Campbell movies, though, and I love him, and The Evil Dead gaining a cult following in the early 2000s was actually a huge part of how the terrible horror movie that my dad was in started to get its own big cult revival. By the way, I don't think I've said the name of the movie at any point in this video, but it is Troll 2. Troll 2. My history with Sam Raimi is shaky. Some of his newer horror movies I don't love as much, but both of these just worked. It's funny because when you're watching The Evil Dead, the thing that is most apparent is you can tell how little money these people had to make this movie. It's so cool to watch them create something with that lack of resources that is so memorable and so special. Honestly, I loved how absurd every single bit of gore was. These were great. And I can't wait to rewatch Army of Darkness with full context. Second to last, I want to talk about a movie called His House, which was released in 2020. This is about a refugee couple who have just survived this really harrowing escape from South Sudan, and they're trying to settle into this new English town that they are living in, but they are faced with some kind of evil lurking in the home that they have been provided by the government. This was, for the most part, absolutely brilliant. It blends trauma and horror incredibly well, which is my personal favorite kind of horror. It's a movie about transition and escape and assimilation and survivor's guilt, and on top of it, it has a few really good scares. I don't know why Matt Smith was there, but I guess it was nice because I'm still trying to wash Morbius out of my brain. I do think the ending of this movie is weaker than the rest of it. Me and horror movie endings, we have a shaky relationship, it happens. Overwhelmingly, my takeaway from His House is that it is an incredibly unique and well-made movie that I definitely want to be able to watch again, mostly for the fact that it was so intricate and so interesting. And finally, I want to wrap up by talking about another new release, the newest release on this list. So we've gone from 1979 all the way to the end of October 2022 to talk about Barbarian. Now, for all of the people who have been exposed already to the reviews of this movie, let me just say, this is a normal horror movie. It will scare you a normal horror movie amount. Please stop listening to reviews along the lines of, so scary your ghost will be afraid to haunt you, because that is setting expectations at an unreasonable degree for a movie that has such, like, standard horror operating bases. Normal expectations would have made this movie so much more enjoyable, because it was a scary movie, but it wasn't so scary your brain will crack in half like an egg scary. I think this movie is at its best at the very beginning when you're playing on ideas of what would you do in this situation? You show up at an Airbnb in the middle of the night and someone is already staying at the same Airbnb. I think it's a situation that is current. It's one that has a lot of, like, give and take. There was a point in the movie when the characters got a little buck wild in their decision making, in terms of thinking, what the fuck are you thinking? What are you doing? Don't do that. But it also manages to be an incredibly interesting, if slightly disturbing movie in terms of how it's made. I almost want to say that this was 3 movies, like, under the hat of one movie, and I think that's a very difficult thing to do. And so the way that this movie uses camera angles, color, setting to distinguish between those 3, like, really distinct elements is very strong. I also want to shout out a very specific trailer to this movie, the trailer that starts with Justin Long driving along the PCA, singing with the top of his car down. That's the ad I want to shout out. That trailer is such a funny way to sell this movie. I love it. If you haven't seen it already, I would really encourage you to check it out and just pay attention not only to how the tone of the trailer changes from the beginning to the end, but also pay attention to the names that they're using on screen. So, like, the movies that they start out comparing it to versus the movies they're comparing it to by the end of the trailer. I love when people have fun with trailers, and this was just one of my favorite movie trailers I've seen in a long time. So, Barbarian, definitely interesting if you are good to go into it with just, like, totally normal expectations. But if you go into it thinking it's going to be the scariest film you've ever seen, you're gonna be disappointed. Alright, that wraps up my list of 24 movies that I watched in the month of October. I would love to hear your thoughts on some of these films. Did you agree with my reviews? Did you disagree? Do you have any recommendations for other horror movies or thrillers based on this list? Let me know down in the comments below. If you like videos talking about books and movies and you want to see more from me, consider subscribing so that you know when I upload. And as an update, I think my next video is going to be a Q&A. So if you have any questions for me at all about my life, books, movies, Brian, the pets, the exhausting experience of watching Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who, then go ahead and leave all of those questions in the comments below. Thanks again to GlassesUSA.com for sponsoring this video, and remember to use the link at the top of my description if you want to explore more frames and contact lenses. Be sure to follow me on social media if you want to see more of what I post, including art and other book recommendations. And other than that, I hope that you loved this video, and I will see you in another one very soon. Bye!